Take it easy on the food, Dad, my daughter-in-law laughed in the private dining room of an upscale restaurant. Don't order anything you can't afford. My son sat beside her and said nothing. Then he raised his wine glass. Let the real family enjoy tonight. I folded my napkin, stood up, and smiled. You're right. Then I walked out. What they didn't know was that I had spent 6 months preparing for this exact moment. And within an hour, in front of the people they wanted to impress, everything they depended on would begin to collapse. This story is about trust betrayal and protecting what matters most. Before we begin, leave me a quick comment. Have you ever dealt with a difficult family situation, yes or no? I read every comment, and your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs. Some details have been changed for storytelling, but the message, the heart of it, stays true. I already knew exactly what was going to happen that night at the Driscoll Grill, because I had been waiting 6 months for it. The coffee in my cup had gone cold an hour ago, but I kept my hands wrapped around the ceramic anyway. 72 years old, and my knuckles still looked like they'd been shaped by pipe wrenches and soldering torches because they had been. 40 years of honest work will do that to a man's hands. 40 years of crawling under houses in August heat, reading underground systems by sound alone, predicting leaks before the first drop of water ever surfaced. Margaret smiled at me from the framed photograph on the kitchen shelf. 8 by 10, taken on our 30th anniversary at Barton Springs. She'd been gone 3 years now, but that picture still caught the morning light the same way her laugh used to fill this log home we built together on Cypress Creek Road. 3 acres of Texas hill country, every beam and board placed by these calloused hands. Margaret, I let it go too long, I said to the empty kitchen, for the sake of peace. But you were right, I built everything with these hands. Time to use them one more time. Today was my birthday. September in Austin, still hot enough to make the oak trees outside shimmer in the heat. Tonight, my son Russell would take me to dinner at the Driscoll Grill, the fancy downtown steakhouse where real estate brokers like him close deals over $100 ribeyes. He'd invited his business partners. He'd told me to dress nice. And I knew with the certainty that comes from reading pressure gauges and flow rates for 4 decades exactly what he was planning. He was going to humiliate me, publicly, in front of people whose respect he craved more than his own father's. You know what 40 years of plumbing teaches you? Water always finds the crack. Always. Doesn't matter how good the joint looks on the surface, if there's weakness underneath pressure, we'll expose it. My family had been leaking for 3 years, ever since Russell married Simone, and her nail salon money started whispering promises in his ear. I'd watched the seepage. I'd measured the flow. I'd given them slack, hoping the system would hold. Tonight the pipe was going to burst, and I was ready. I stood and crossed to the desk in the corner, the old oak rollaway I'd salvaged from a demolition site in 1982, and refinished myself. The bottom drawer opened with a familiar squeak. Inside, beneath a stack of paid utility bills and Margaret's recipe card, sat a brown manila envelope. Conrad Thornton's law firm logo in the corner, signed and notarized March 14th, 2025, 6 months ago. I didn't need to open it. I'd memorized every word the day I signed it. The irrevocable living trust that transferred my entire estate. The house, the 3 acres. The retirement accounts, every cent of the $1.2 million I'd earned, with sweat and skill completely out of reach. They thought they were coming to collect their inheritance. They were walking into the last job I'd ever work. I slid the envelope back and closed the drawer. The squeak sounded like satisfaction. In the bathroom, I ran hot water and lathered shaving cream across my jaw. The mirror showed me the truth, a man who'd spent 72 years keeping his word, paying his debts and fixing what was broken. Deep-set eyes the color of creek water, sun-weathered skin, the kind of face that didn't photograph well at country club fundraisers. Russell had started asking me not to come to those. My hands moved the razor in steady strokes, the same methodical precision I'd used to thread pipe for 4 decades. Master plumber, licensed 1985. Before that, 10 years as a journeyman and 5 as an apprentice, learning the trade from men who believed work should be done right the first time. I'd built my reputation one joint at a time, one satisfied customer at a time, one emergency midnight call at a time. Margaret used to say my hands smelled like honest work, motor oil and pipe dope, and the metallic tang of copper fittings. She never once asked me to scrub it away before dinner, never suggested I wear cologne to cover it. When I'd come home after 18-hour shifts during the freeze of 2021, when half of Austin's pipes burst and plumbers worked around the clock, she'd made me coffee and rubbed my shoulders and told me I was exactly the man she'd married. For 3 years, I'd been cutting them slack. For 3 years, I'd been the safety net co-signing loans covering Russell's failed investments, pretending not to notice when Simone's smile went cold whenever I showed up in my work clothes. For 3 years, I'd been watching the pressure build. Tonight, I was cutting the rope. A man who spent his life fixing what was broken, I should have seen it coming when my own family started leaking. But you don't want to believe it. You tell yourself it's a phase that blood will hold, that the boy who used to hand you wrenches in the garage will remember where he came from. But Russell hadn't just forgotten. He'd started being ashamed. I walked back to the bedroom and opened the closet. Past the church clothes Margaret had picked out, past the wool jacket I'd worn to her funeral, all the way to the back, where the everyday flannels hung. I pulled out the faded blue and gray one, the shirt Russell hated most. The one that still carried the faint scent of the trade, even after washing. The one he'd once told me in a voice tight with embarrassment, made me look like I should be asking for spare change. I buttoned it slowly, tucked it in, checked the mirror one more time. 72 years old. Calloused hands that had built a life from nothing, clear eyes that had seen the trap coming 6 months ago and prepared accordingly. Ready. In 6 hours at the Driscoll Grill, my son would make the biggest mistake of his life. He'd assume the old plumber was too simple, too tired, too grateful for the attention to see what was happening. He'd assume wrong. I looked at Margaret's photograph one more time. "Watch this, sweetheart," I said. "One last job." That first bite never made it to my mouth. The Driscoll Grill's private dining room smelled like money truffle oil, aged beef, and the kind of wine that costs more per bottle than most people spend on groceries in a month. Crystal chandeliers threw amber light across white tablecloth. My son Russell, 42 years old, and wearing a tailored suit that couldn't hide the desperation in his eyes, sat across from me flanked by two men in equally expensive clothes. Gerald Prescott, 55. A commercial real estate investor with silver hair and a Rolex that caught the light every time he lifted his wine glass. Philip Kendrick, 48. Prescott's attorney and business partners, stone-faced and quiet. Russell had been courting them for months, chasing a $200,000 development deal that would finally prove he belonged in their world. And beside Russell sat Simone, 39, my daughter-in-law, owner of 2 profitable Austin nail salons, designer jewelry at her throat, a thin, cold smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was the one who'd suggested this dinner. I knew that because Russell couldn't lie worth a damn. I'd just picked up my fork when my hand slipped. The water glass tipped, spilling ice water across the white linen. Not much, maybe half a glass. I reached for my napkin. Russell's chair scraped back so hard it echoed. "Dad, look at yourself." His voice carried across the room loud enough that the couple at the next table stopped mid-conversation. "You smell like motor oil. This is a 5-star restaurant, not your damn plumbing shop. Eat fast and keep quiet. Don't order anything expensive. It's our card, not yours." Gerald Prescott stared at his plate. Philip Kendrick took a long, slow sip of wine. Simone leaned back in her chair, that cold smile widening just a fraction. "Let the real family enjoy the good stuff," she said. "You want to know what hurts more than the words? The silence. The way Russell didn't look at me. The way he just stood there breathing hard, waiting for me to shrink. I set my napkin down, folded it carefully, stood with the same deliberate calm I'd used to shut off main water lines for 40 years. "You're right, son," I said. "I'll head home, save you the trouble." I walked out into the cool September air. The door to the Driscoll Grill closed behind me with a soft, expensive click. My phone buzzed in my pocket. One missed call. Wells Fargo automated confirmation line. I didn't need to listen to the message. I already knew what it said. Authorized user revocation executed 28 minutes ago. 7:02 p.m. I'd made the call from my truck in the parking garage before I even walked into the restaurant. The trap had been set 6 months ago. Tonight was just the trigger. I drove home, poured myself a cup of tea, sat in Margaret's chair and waited, because I knew exactly what was happening back at that table. Russell and Simone waited until I was gone, gave it maybe 10 minutes to make sure I wasn't coming back. Then they ordered, not the modest entrees they'd been pretending to consider when I was there. No, dry-aged ribeye, lobster bisque, a second bottle of Bordeaux, then a third. Simone's laughter carrying across the private dining room higher and brighter, now that the embarrassing old man was gone. Russell leaning forward, animated pitching the development deal to Prescott and Kendrick with renewed confidence. See, I handled it. Family's handled. Now let's talk about the real opportunity. 90 minutes later, bloated and wine-drunk and certain of their victory, Russell waved for the check. Sheldon Rawlings, the Driscoll's manager, 50 years old. Gray at the temples, the kind of career hospitality. Professional who remembered faces, stepped forward personally. He was holding the receipt and a declined transaction slip. I knew Sheldon. 5 years ago, his restaurant had a burst pipe behind the kitchen at 9 p.m. on a Saturday. I'd been the one who answered the emergency call, worked until 2 in the morning to save their weekend service. Sheldon remembered. "I'm sorry, sir," Sheldon said, his voice carrying that particular tone of professional regret that somehow made humiliation worse. "This card has been declined. The primary account holder, Mr. Vernon Caldwell, called our front desk 90 minutes ago. He also called his bank to revoke your authorized user status, effective immediately. The balance is $1,847. You'll need to settle with your own card. Some pipes don't just leak, they burst. And when they do, you don't patch them, you shut off the valve and let gravity do the rest." Russell's face went white, then red. He fumbled for his wallet, pulled out his own card, handed it over. "Declined." Simone tried hers. "Declined." Maxed out, probably I'd seen the shopping bags coming into my house for 3 years. Gerald Prescott and Philip Kendrick exchanged a look. The kind of look that says everything without a single word. They stood. No handshakes, no apologies. Just two men who'd seen exactly what kind of person they'd almost gone into business with. The $200,000 deal walked out the door in tailored suits and Italian shoes. Russell sat frozen, staring at the bill. Simone's hands shook as she pulled out her phone. I didn't need to be there to know who she was calling. Her brother, the one with money. The one who'd have to wire emergency funds to cover the bills so they could leave the restaurant, without a scene worse than the one they'd already caused. "What happened?" he'd ask. "The restaurant made a mistake," she'd say. "I sat in my kitchen tea going cold in Margaret's favorite mug." The phone on the table buzzed. Text messages, missed calls. Russell's name lighting up the screen over and over. I didn't answer. They had to call Simone's brother to wire them money, just to pay the bill and leave. She told him the restaurant made a mistake. I poured myself another cup of tea in the quiet kitchen, staring at Margaret's photograph. I poured myself another cup of tea. The wrench had only just started turning, and I had barely started turning the wrench. The house was quiet when I got home, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that feels lonely. It felt protective. 10:30 at night. I set my keys on the counter and filled the kettle. While the water heated, I pulled Margaret's favorite mug from the cabinet, the ceramic one with the faded bluebonnet pattern she'd bought at the Round Top Antique Fair in 1994. The handle had a chip in it from the day she'd dropped it, rushing to answer the phone. I'd offered to replace it. She'd said no, that the chip gave it character. I made green tea, sat at the kitchen table, stared at her photograph on the shelf. Margaret smiled back at me, frozen at 66 in that picture from our anniversary trip to Barton Springs. The light had caught her just right that day. Still beautiful, still sharp-eyed. Still the woman who could read me better than I could read myself. I set the folder on the table and looked at her photograph. "I kept my promise, Maggie," I said quietly. "Just took me 3 years longer than it should have." The tea was bitter on my tongue. I'd steeped it too long, but I drank it anyway. "Let me tell you something. Tonight wasn't a snap decision. It wasn't rage or hurt pride that made me revoke that card. This wasn't a knee-jerk reaction to my son calling me white trash in front of business partners. I'd been watching for 3 years. 3 years since Russell married Simone and moved into the upstairs bedrooms temporarily. They said just until they saved enough for their own place. I told them take all the time they needed. No rent. Family helps family. Instead of saving, they bought designer clothes and luxury furniture. Complained about my old windows, my outdated kitchen, the smell of pipe dope that never quite left the garage. Russell stopped defending me in conversations, started making excuses when I showed up to family events in my work boots. Simone barred me from the living room when her nail salon clients came over for wine nights. Said my presence made them uncomfortable. This was my house. my living room, the room where Margaret and I had watched 40 years of Sunday football. Every time Russell asked to borrow money, always temporary, always cash flow, always with that apologetic smile I gave it, kept a ledger in the back of my desk drawer. Dates, amounts, purposes. Never saw a penny back. You want to know when I finally decided it wasn't tonight. It was the day Simone told me when I could use my own backyard. April 2025. She was hosting a brunch for her salon staff. Told me not, asked, told me to stay inside until 2 p.m. because my lawnmower would ruin the ambiance. My mower. My lawn. My house that I'd built with my own hands on land I'd paid off in 1996. I stood at the kitchen window and watched her serve mimosas under the oak tree Margaret and I had planted the year we got married. And I understood something that made my chest go cold. I'd become a tenant in my own life. For the sake of peace had been my excuse for years. The phrase that kept me quiet when Russell made jokes about plumbers at dinner parties. The phrase that made me swallow my anger when Simone redecorated Margaret's sewing room without asking. The phrase that turned me into a ghost in my own home. But love without respect, that's just being taken advantage of. Margaret had seen it before she died. Told me in the hospice room 2 weeks before the end, her voice barely a whisper. Vernon Russell's changing. Simone's changing him. Don't let them take what we built. Promise me. I'd promised, then spent 3 years breaking that promise for the sake of peace. Not anymore. I stood and walked to the heavy metal filing cabinet in the corner, the olive green 4-drawer unit I'd salvaged from a government surplus auction in 1989. Bottom drawer. Beneath the paid utility bills and Margaret's handwritten recipe cards exactly where I'd left it this morning. The brown manila envelope. Conrad Thornton's law firm logo in the corner. I pulled it out, set it on the table under the overhead light, and opened it fully. 43 pages. Legal-sized paper. Every paragraph dense with the kind of language attorneys use when they want to make sure there's no misunderstanding later. The irrevocable living trust of Vernon James Caldwell. Beneficiaries listed on page 7. Not Russell, not Simone. The house, the land, the retirement accounts, every cent of the $1.2 million I'd earned, over 40 years of crawling under houses and fixing what was broken. All of it transferred into a trust with ironclad instructions about distribution. Page 12 specified the trustee. Conrad Thornton himself. A man I'd known for 20 years, ever since I'd replaced his office building's entire plumbing system after the freeze of 2011. A man who'd sat across from me in March and listened to everything I'd been holding in. Vernon. Conrad had said, his voice quiet and careful, "Are you absolutely certain? Once we execute this, it's irrevocable. You can't change your mind." "I'm certain," I'd told him. "I've watched the pressure building for 3 years. Time to shut off the valve before the whole system bursts." He'd nodded, drew up the documents, walked me through every clause, every contingency, every legal protection. I'd signed on March 14th, 6 months ago, 6 months before tonight's birthday dinner, 6 months before Russell stood up in that restaurant and told me I smelled like motor oil. 6 months before Simone smiled that cold smile and said, "Let the real family enjoy the good stuff." This wasn't a reaction, it was a plan. I'd been setting the trap since March, watching them walk toward it, waiting for the moment when they'd step on the trigger. Tonight they'd stepped. I set the folder on the table and traced my finger across the date, stamped at the bottom of the signature page. March 14th, 2025. The notary seal still raised and crisp under my thumb. Everything was already in motion long before Russell embarrassed me at that dinner table. The folder had been sitting in that drawer for 6 months, and the trust was just the first piece. It started on a Tuesday morning in March, 6 months before the birthday dinner, in a glass-walled office overlooking the Capitol. Conrad Thornton, 58 years old and sharp as the crease in his suit pants, sat across the conference table from me with a leather portfolio already open. I'd known Conrad for 15 years, ever since he'd helped me navigate a land dispute with the county over easement rights. He was the kind of attorney who didn't talk unless he had something worth saying. "We're going to make this untouchable," he said, sliding the documents across polished glass. "Irrevocable living trust. Everything transfers out of your personal name. The house, the land, the retirement accounts. If they come after it, there's nothing left to take." I signed on the 14th, watched the notary press her seal into the paper, felt something shift in my chest, not relief exactly, but the satisfaction of a valve properly installed. April came warm that year. I sat in my truck outside the Goodwill on Highway 183 and made the call I'd been putting off. Floyd Garrison answered on the second ring. 74 years old, retired Travis County Sheriff, my best friend for 40 years. We'd met in 1985 when his department needed emergency plumbing work at the county lockup during a weekend flood. He'd stayed to help me carry pipe, and we'd been close ever since. "Vernon," he said, and I could hear him smiling through the phone. "I've been waiting for this call for 3 years. That stopped me cold. You knew." Course I knew. Saw how they looked at you at Margaret's funeral. Saw how Russell started making excuses about why you couldn't come to Thanksgiving. You think I'm retired and blind. I need help. "Already on it," Floyd said. "Let me buy you lunch." You don't rush a plumbing job. You measure twice. You check the pressure. You install the shutoff valve before you ever touch the main line. May, Cedar Park Family Clinic. Routine physical with Dr. Wendell Sinclair, 60 years old. My physician for 2 decades. Thinning gray hair and reading glasses that sat crooked on his nose. He delivered Bryn treated my pneumonia in 2019, held my hand the day Margaret's cancer came back terminal. "Everything looks good. Vernon," he said, reviewing my charts. "Blood pressure's steady. Cholesterol's managed. Reflexes sharp." "I need something else," I told him. "Cognitive baseline, in writing, with your signature and today's date." Wendell looked at me over those crooked glasses. 30 seconds of silence. Then he pulled out the Montreal Cognitive Assessment form. 20 minutes later, he tallied the score. 29 out of 30, he said. "Cognitively sharp. I'll put that in writing and keep it on file." Dated and signed. He didn't ask why. Didn't need to. June. Floyd introduced me to his son over coffee at a diner off Lamar Boulevard. Pierce Garrison. 43 years old former Austin PD detective turned private investigator. Quiet voice, careful eyes. The kind of man who noticed when someone checked their watch twice. "Dad says you need surveillance work," Pierce said. "Discreet," Verila said. He slid a business card across the table. No logo, just a phone number. In late October, Floyd and I would install the cameras ourselves. But first I needed the rest of the pieces in place. Small and visible. Legal on my own property. I tested the footage on my laptop. Crystal clear. Audio perfect. September 14th. Birthday dinner. The Driscoll Grill. Everything I'd spent 6 months building came online the moment Russell stood up and told me I smelled like motor oil. 1 week later, early October, the next piece fell into place. It was late afternoon. Golden Texas sun slicing through the oak trees, throwing long shadows across the back porch. I could see my neighbor across the fence, watering her roses, the spray catching the light. Then I heard the knock, hesitant. 3 soft taps on the screen door. Bryn stood on the porch. 14 years old. My granddaughter. Russell's daughter. She had her mother's dark hair, but her grandfather's eyes, the same creekwater gray Margaret used to say could see straight through lies. Her face was flushed, hands trembling. In her right palm she held an old Samsung phone screen cracked like a spiderweb. She didn't say a word, just held it up and pressed play. Simone's voice came through the tiny speaker, cold and clear as January ice. "If we can prove he's losing it mentally, we petition for guardianship. His doctor is retired. We can find someone else to sign off." Russell's voice quieter, uncertain. "He doesn't seem confused to me." Simone again sharp now, impatient. "He doesn't have to be confused. He just has to look confused on paper. We get a judge to sign the order, and everything transfers to Russell as legal guardian. The house, the accounts, all of it. He's 72. No one's going to question it." Silence on the recording. Then Russell so quiet I almost missed it. "You're sure this will work?" "Trust me," Simone said. The recording stopped. That cracked phone in my granddaughter's shaking hands held more evidence than any lawyer could manufacture. My own blood had just handed me the smoking gun. Bryn looked up at me, tears welling but not falling. "I recorded it through the wall. My room's right next to theirs. The logs are thin. I thought you should know." I reached out slowly, placed my hand on her shoulder. She was trembling. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. "You did the right thing." She wiped her eyes. "Is Dad going to be okay?" I pulled her into a hug, felt her shoulders shake. "Your dad is going to be fine. He's going to learn a very expensive lesson, but he'll be fine." I didn't tell her the rest. I didn't tell her that her mother was about to learn a lesson that would cost a lot more than money. And I still had more pieces to put in place before they made their move. The next morning they came down the stairs like a storm. Russell red-faced, Simone ice cold. 9 o'clock. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, watching Texas. Sun streamed through the window and light up the dust motes hanging in the air. I'd been up since 5, made breakfast, read the paper, waited. Simone hit the kitchen, first heels clicking on the hardwood floor like a countdown timer. Russell followed 2 steps behind his shirt, untucked hair uncombed. She planted herself at the edge of the table, arms crossed. "We need to talk about the credit card," she said. No good morning, no preamble. "We're family. We need it." I took a slow sip of coffee. Set the mug down carefully, let the silence stretch. "Dad," Russell said, his voice softer, uncertain. "Come on, this is ridiculous. Just add us back to the account. This is my house, Simone," I said quietly. "I need my half of the basement for my own projects." She blinked, wrong-footed. "What?" I stood, walked to the heavy metal filing cabinet in the corner, pulled open the bottom drawer. Behind me, I could hear Russell shifting his weight, the old floorboards creaking under him. I pulled out 3 documents, laid them flat on the kitchen table without a word. The first page was a formal, written notice to vacate. 72 hours. Drafted in strict accordance with Texas Property Code Section 24.005. Tenant names Russell James Caldwell and Simone Lee Caldwell. Property address 4782, Cypress Creek Road, Austin, Texas. At the bottom, a fresh notary stamp. The ink was barely dry. I'd had it notarized at 8:15 that morning, 45 minutes before they woke up. Russell picked it up, read it once, then again. The color drained from his face, the same pale shock I'd seen when he was 10 years old, and accidentally broke Margaret's favorite crystal vase. "What the hell is this?" His voice cracked on the last word. I slid the second document across the table. "Comprehensive Consumer Credit Report. Russell James Caldwell, date of birth, social security number, current address." And then the damage line by line. 4 credit cards, all maxed. Total revolving debt $48,000. Pending collections lawsuit from a former real estate partner. Amount claimed $35,000. Failed land speculation investment, cosign loan in default. Balance owed $67,000. Total liabilities $120,000. Simone snatched the paper off the table. For the first time in 3 years, I saw her composure crack. Her hands shook. Simone's face went through 5 different expressions in 3 seconds. I'd seen that look before on a man whose pipe had just burst, and he was calculating how much it was going to cost him to fix it. I slid the 3rd page forward. A ledger. 3 years of meticulous record-keeping. Every dollar I'd quietly spent covering their lives while they lived rent-free upstairs. Electricity bills when Russell's direct deposit bounced. Property taxes when Simone claimed her salon accounts were frozen. Structural repairs to the upstairs bathroom after Simone remodeled without asking. Vehicle fuel. Internet. Even groceries during the months they claimed to be between paychecks. 36 months. $43,200. I let them read it. Let the numbers sink in. Then I spoke for the first time that morning, my voice steady as an industrial blueprint. "That's what you owe me. Not legally, I'm not asking for it back. I just want you to know the number. Because this house is the only float keeping you above water. And as of this morning, that float belongs to a trust, not to either of you." Simone's head snapped up. "You can't do this. We're family." "You're right," I said. "We are. That's why I'm giving you 72 hours instead of calling the sheriff this morning." Russell dropped into a chair like his legs had given out. Simone stood frozen, the credit report still trembling in her hands. I picked up my coffee mug and walked outside. That afternoon, around 3 o'clock, I was checking the fence line between my property and Luther Ashford's yard when I saw him waving me over. Luther, 65, retired postal worker, my neighbor for 20 years. He had the eager curiosity of someone who'd watched the morning's drama unfold from across the fence. "Ahase Vernon," he called out, standing between his rose bushes, where the late afternoon sun softened everything to gold. "I saw the look on that daughter-in-law's face when she left this morning. You doing all right?" "I'm fine, Luther." He nodded, hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Listen, I've been meaning to tell you something. About a month ago I ran into Simone at that high-end watch repair shop on Congress Avenue. You know, the one does appraisals, estate jewelry, all that. I waited. She brought in Russell's Rolex, that big, flashy Submariner he's always showing off. Said she needed a formal appraisal for insurance purposes. Luther's eyes went wide. The master watchmaker took one look under his loupe and told her it was a high-grade Thai replica, worth maybe $200, not the $12,000 she'd been claiming. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Her face turned crimson. Luther continued. She grabbed the watch and stormed out without a word. I thought you should know. I looked back at my house, at the upstairs window where Russell and Simone's bedroom faced the yard. The whole thing was a show, Luther, I said quietly. Every bit of it. You want to know when I knew Simone wasn't going to give up when she didn't scream? When she just went quiet and walked away. That's when I knew she'd already switched gears. I walked back inside, made myself another cup of coffee. Somewhere upstairs I could hear Simone on the phone. Her voice was low and urgent, the words muffled, but the tone unmistakable. Sharp, strategic. She was already calling a lawyer. The eviction notice was just the opening move. She was planning her counterstrike, and I knew exactly what it would be. 3 days later, when the 72-hour deadline hit zero, and they still hadn't packed a single box, they walked into the office of the most expensive defense attorney they could find. I wasn't in that room, but Russell told me about it later, every detail, like a man confessing sins he couldn't carry anymore. And what he didn't tell me I pieced together from legal discovery records that came months later. Marcus Holloway, 52 years old, sharp-eyed defense attorney with a corner office overlooking Congress Avenue in downtown Austin. The kind of lawyer who charged $500 an hour and made sure you knew it from the moment you walked through his glass doors. Russell and Simone had gotten his name through a panicked referral from one of Simone's nail salon clients, someone who'd used Holloway to fight off a commercial lease dispute. They'd called that morning desperate. Holloway's receptionist had squeezed them in at 2 o'clock. The conference room was all glass and steel, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Capitol dome, polished table that could seat 12. Russell said his hands were shaking when he sat down. Holloway came in with a leather portfolio and a tablet. No small talk, no pleasantries. He opened his laptop, and got straight to business. Walk me through the situation, he said. Simone did the talking. She always did. Told him about the eviction notice, the canceled credit card, Vernon's sudden hostility. The trust that Vernon claimed made everything untouchable. He's old, Simone said according to Russell's later confession. 72. We think he's not thinking clearly. We need to challenge the trust. Prove it's not valid. Holloway's expression didn't change. He pulled up the Travis County Property Deeds Registry on his computer, started typing. Heavy, deliberate keystrokes that echoed in the quiet room. 10 minutes passed. Holloway's face went from neutral to concentrated to something that looked like frustration. He typed faster, clicked through screens, cross-referenced records. Russell said the silence in that room felt like drowning. Finally, Holloway stopped typing. He sat back in his chair, turned the monitor away from them, let out a long, quiet sigh. Mr. Caldwell, he said, his voice flat and professional, I need to inform you the property at 478 2 Cypress Creek Road, the 3-acre lot, and all associated real estate assets were transferred into an irrevocable living trust 6 months ago. Your father's name no longer appears as direct owner on any of these holdings. Russell stammered. What does that mean? Holloway looked at him like a teacher explaining to a failing student why they wouldn't graduate. It means you have no legal standing to challenge the property. At all. The room went silent. The trust was executed in March. Holloway continued scrolling through the records on his screen. Notarized witness filed with the county. Clean paperwork. No irregularities. And here's the part that matters. It's irrevocable. Your father can't change it even if he wanted to. The assets are locked. But Russell started. There's no but. Holloway cut him off. You could try to argue he lacked mental capacity when he signed, but you'd need medical evidence, psychiatric evaluation, cognitive testing, something dated close to the signing date. And even then, the burden of proof is on you. You'd be fighting uphill against clean legal documents and a competent notary. Simone leaned forward. What if we can prove he wasn't thinking clearly? What if we get a doctor to what Holloway said? Retroactively diagnose him 6 months after the fact. Any judge would laugh that out of court, especially if his own physician signed off on his competence before the trust was executed. Russell told me later that Simone went completely still at that moment. Didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at Holloway like she was memorizing every word. So there's nothing we can do, Russell said quietly. Legally. Holloway closed his laptop. No, he owns nothing in his personal name. The trust owns everything, and unless you can prove fraud or undue influence, which would require evidence of coercion, and good luck finding that you have no case. He slid a business card across the table. My retainer for this kind of litigation starts at $25,000, and I'm telling you right now, you'd lose. I don't take cases I can't win. This one, you can't win. When a pipe's blocked and pressure won't clear it, some people switch tactics. They don't fix the blockage, they try to break the pipe. Russell said they sat in that glass conference room for another 5 minutes, while Holloway explained the finer points of Texas estate law. But Simone wasn't listening. She was staring out the window at the Capitol dome. Her jaw set, her fingers drumming a silent rhythm on the armrest of her chair. When they finally left, Russell tried to talk to her in the elevator. She didn't respond, didn't even look at him. They walked to the parking garage in silence, got in the car. Simone took the wheel. Russell told me later that Simone didn't say a word in the car on the way home. Not one. She just stared out the windshield the whole drive, her hands tight on the steering wheel, her eyes calculating something he couldn't see. He tried once. So what do we do now? She didn't answer. When they pulled into the driveway at Cypress Creek Road, she turned off the engine and sat there for a full minute. Then she got out, walked into the house, and went straight upstairs. Russell told me all of this 3 months later, sitting in a diner booth with his head in his hands crying, like I hadn't seen him cry since he was a child. But I didn't need him to tell me what happened next, because I knew that silence in the car wasn't defeat. It wasn't acceptance. It was the sound of someone who'd just lost at chess and decided to flip the board. Simone hadn't given up. She'd just switched gears, and I knew exactly what gear she'd shifted into. The recording Bryn had captured through the wall lasted 11 minutes. I'd listened to it 3 times by the time morning came. 11 minutes. Simone laid it all out. Find a private clinic physician willing to sign a fraudulent cognitive decline assessment for cash. Didn't matter if it was true, just needed to look official. Armed with that, they'd petition Travis County Probate Court for an emergency durable power of attorney. Once they had legal control, they could invalidate the trust from the inside, claim undue influence, claim diminished capacity, claim anything that would get them access to the assets. The trust can be challenged, Simone said. We just need the right paperwork. Medical records saying he wasn't competent when he signed. A judge will believe a doctor over a 72-year-old plumber. Russell's voice again weaker this time. What if someone finds out? Finds out what? Simone snapped. That we're concerned about your elderly father's mental health, that we're trying to protect him. That's what we'll say. And by the time anyone asks questions, we'll already have control. My granddaughter pressed record. She held that cracked phone against the wall for 11 minutes. She didn't know it at the time, but she'd just become the most important witness in a criminal case. When the voices finally stopped, and she heard their bathroom door close, she stopped the recording, saved it, backed it up to 3 different places. Then she came downstairs and knocked on my door. That was the second time she brought me a recording, the second time my own blood handed me evidence of conspiracy. I listened to the whole thing, sat at my kitchen table with that cracked phone between us, watching my granddaughter's hands shake. When it finished, I looked at her. Thank you, sweetheart. She wiped her eyes. What are you going to do? What I should have done years ago, I said. The following week, I drove to Dr. Wendell Sinclair's family practice clinic in Cedar Park. Same doctor I'd been seeing for 20 years. Same man who'd held my hand the day Margaret's cancer came back terminal. I sat on the examination table, got straight to the point. Doc, I need you to do a full cognitive assessment on me, and I need you to put the results in writing notarized, dated, and kept on file. Wendell Sinclair was 60 years old, thinning gray hair, reading glasses that sat crooked on his nose. He'd been practicing medicine since before I'd retired from plumbing. He looked at me for a long moment, didn't ask why, didn't need to. Sit tight, he said. He came back with a clipboard and a packet of papers. The Montreal Cognitive Assessment, MOCA they call it, 30-point neurological test covering memory language, abstract thinking, executive function, the gold standard for measuring cognitive decline. He walked me through it, asked me to remember 5 words and repeat them later. Draw a cube, identify animals, subtract 7 from 100, then keep subtracting. Name the date, the city, the place. I answered every question. When you're a plumber, you learn to think 3 steps ahead. You don't wait for the pipe to burst, you install the shutoff valve before there's even pressure on the line. 20 minutes later, Wendell tallied the score. 29 out of 30, he said. He wrote it down, signed it, dated it October 14th, 2025. Then he typed it into his computer system. Permanent medical record, log sealed time-stamped. He printed a second copy. Notarized it himself. He kept a stamp in his office for exactly these kinds of situations. He slid the paper across the desk. Vernon Caldwell, age 72. Cognitively sharp. No evidence of dementia or cognitive impairment. Full legal capacity confirmed as of October 14th, 2025. He looked me in the eyes. Vernon, whoever they are, they picked the wrong man to mess with. I shook his hand, folded the document carefully, walked back to my truck. At home, I pulled out the brown manila envelope from the filing cabinet, the one with Conrad Thornton's law firm logo in the corner, the one with the trust documents inside. I added the cognitive assessment, slid it right next to the notarized trust papers. One by one, every exit they thought they had was being sealed shut. They just didn't know it yet. Simone was plotting to prove I was mentally incompetent. She was planning to find some corrupt doctor to sign off on a fraudulent diagnosis. She was going to march into probate court and claim I'd lost my mind when I signed away my estate. But I had a certified baseline, signed by a physician with 20 years of history treating me, notarized, filed in the permanent medical system, dated after the trust was executed. Every door she thought she could open I'd already locked from the inside. But Simone wasn't the only one gathering ammunition. The private investigator slid 2 folders across the table, and I knew before I opened them that everything was about to get worse. Mid-October, late afternoon. I was sitting in a dark corner booth at an indie coffeehouse on South Congress Avenue, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and music loud enough to drown out private conversations. Pierce Garrison sat across from me, 43 years old, wire-rimmed glasses, simple polo shirt, a laptop open between us. Floyd's son, former Austin PD detective, the kind of investigator who didn't miss details. He'd been working for 3 weeks. I'd paid him a retainer in cash-old habit from decades of blue-collar work, where you learned not to leave paper trails unless you had to. Your son's debt is exactly as we outlined, Pierce said, tapping the first folder. $120,000 across 4 maxed credit cards, a real estate partner lawsuit, and that land deal that went south. But your daughter-in-law, that's where it gets interesting. He opened the laptop, turned it so I could see the screen. Court records, State of Nevada, Clark County District Court, case filed March 2016. Simone Lee, defendant, commercial insurance fraud. Nevada, 2016, Pierce said. She was working as an insurance broker in Las Vegas. Got caught falsifying claims documentation for a commercial property client. Inflated damage estimates, forged inspection reports. The client was trying to collect on a policy for water damage that never actually happened. I stared at the screen, read the case summary twice. She took a plea deal, Pierce continued. Probation, no jail time, but it's a permanent felony conviction. And here's the part that matters. The Nevada Department of Insurance revoked her brokerage license for life. She can never work in insurance again. Not in Nevada. Not anywhere that runs a background check. I sat back, processed that. That's why she's been so careful to avoid anything that involves law enforcement, I said quietly. Pierce nodded. Exactly. She has everything to lose if this goes anywhere near a courthouse. A felony on her record, a revoked professional license. She fled Nevada, came to Texas, set up cash-based nailed salons under the radar. Keeps everything off the books as much as she can. A felony conviction, a revoked license. A woman who'd built her entire Texas life on running from her Nevada past. And now she was trying to run a con on a 72-year-old plumber. I looked out the window at the South Congress traffic, watched the cars blur past in the late afternoon sun. What else, I asked? Pierce closed the laptop, slid the second folder across the table. This one was thinner, just a few pages. I opened it. Bank statements. A federal credit union in Round Rock, about 20 miles north of Austin. Account opened April 2023. Account holder, Simone Lee Caldwell. Russell's name wasn't on it. Current balance, $47,000. I flipped through the statements. Deposits every month. Small amounts. 300 here, 500 there. Sometimes 1,000. Always cash. always rounded numbers that didn't match any payroll or business income I'd ever seen documented. Cash skimming, Pierce said. From the nail salons. She's been pulling money out of the registers for 3 years, never reporting it, never putting it through the books. IRS has no idea it exists. He pulled out a second sheet, a summary he'd put together himself. Estimated unreported income based on deposit patterns and business revenue analysis. $127,000 over 3 fiscal years. This is an exit fund, Vernon, Pierce said. His voice was flat, professional, but I could hear the edge in it. If her plan to seize your estate fell apart, she was preparing to skip town and leave your son holding the entire financial bag. I stared at the number, $47,000 in the account. Another $80,000 already spent, or hidden somewhere else. Russell had no idea. He was drowning in debt, maxing out credit cards, getting sued by former business partners, and the whole time his wife had been quietly building an escape fund behind his back. "Does my son know about this account?" I asked quietly. Pierce shook his head. "No, sir, he has absolutely no idea." "You want to know when I stopped being angry at my son?" "Right then. When I realized he wasn't the mastermind, he was the mark." Russell had married a woman with a felony conviction she'd never told him about. A woman who'd been kicked out of Nevada for fraud. A woman who'd spent 3 years skimming cash from her own businesses and hiding it in a secret account. And when the pressure mounted, when the debt piled up and the scheme started falling apart, she'd been planning to disappear and leave him holding the bag. I closed the folder, slid it back across the table. "Can you document all of this?" I asked. "Court records, bank statements, the unreported income." "Already done," Pierce said. He pulled a flash drive from his shirt pocket, set it on the table. "Everything's backed up. Copies of the Nevada court filings, screenshots of the bank statements, transaction logs. If this ever goes to law enforcement or a courtroom, you've got it all." I picked up the flash drive, slipped it into my pocket. "What do I owe you?" Pierce told me. I counted out the cash from my wallet, 20s and 50s. He didn't ask for a receipt. "One more thing," he said. "If she figures out you know about any of this, she's going to escalate. People with this kind of history, when they're cornered, they don't back down. They double down." "I know," I said. I walked out to my truck, drove home through the October afternoon. The sun was setting over the hill country, throwing long shadows across Cypress Creek Road. I thought about Russell, not with anger, with something closer to pity. He'd picked a partner who was running her own game the whole time, and he was too blinded by pride to see it. She'd married him for access to his father's estate. She'd built a secret exit fund in case it all fell apart. And now that the legal routes were closed, she was pivoting to something darker. But I wasn't done gathering evidence yet. The cameras went in on a Tuesday morning when they were both at work. 2 pinhole lenses smaller than a shirt button, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Late October. Early morning. Floyd Garrison arrived at my house at 7:15 in his old pickup, carrying a nondescript black duffel bag. Russell and Simone had left for work 10 minutes earlier. We had maybe 3 hours before anyone came home. Floyd was 74, retired Travis County Sheriff. 40 years of law enforcement, 30 of those running investigations. If anyone knew how to document a crime scene before the crime happened, it was him. We worked in silence. He'd done this kind of installation before surveillance work for custody cases, elder abuse investigations, fraud documentation. Legal as long as it was your own property, and this was still my house. The first camera went behind the living room smoke detector. Floyd popped the plastic cover, drilled a hole the size of a pencil lead through the grill, and threaded the lens through. Motion activated, battery backup, wireless transmission to an encrypted server. "Test it," he said. I walked across the room, waved my hand. Floyd's phone buzzed. He pulled up the app, showed me the screen. Crystal clear video, time-stamped, secure. The second camera took longer. We mounted it inside the wooden frame of a decorative picture hanging on the wall, directly opposite the master bathroom. The bathroom I used to use before Russell and Simone took over the whole upstairs. The bathroom with the medicine cabinet where I kept my prescriptions. Floyd adjusted the angle 3 times until he had it perfect. Unobstructed view of the cabinet, close enough to see labels on bottles, far enough to capture anyone who walked into frame. "Crystal clear, Vernon," he said, showing me the feed again. "If anyone comes in here and touches that medicine cabinet, we'll have it on video with a secure digital timestamp. Installing a surveillance camera is like installing a pressure gauge on a water main. It doesn't stop the leak, it just makes sure you have proof when it happens. I walked into the bathroom, opened the medicine cabinet, reached past the aspirin and antacids to the back shelf where I kept my blood pressure medication. Amlodipine, 5 milligrams. Prescription bottle with my name on it, white round tablets. I'd been taking one every morning for 3 years. I pulled the bottle out, opened it, dumped the pills into a small plastic bag, sealed it, tucked it into the secure pouch inside my flannel shirt pocket. Then I took an identical empty bottle, same prescription label, same pharmacy sticker, same everything, and put it back on the shelf in the exact same spot. Floyd watched me from the doorway. "You sure about this, Vernon?" he asked quietly. I looked at him. "Floyd, I've been fixing broken pipes for 40 years. You don't rush the job. You find the leak. Then you shut the valve." He nodded, understood. We cleaned up, packed the tools. He left through the back door at 9:30. I made myself a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table staring at Margaret's photograph, waiting. 3 days later, early November morning, I walked into the master bathroom and opened the medicine cabinet. My fingers wrapped around the prescription bottle, and I knew immediately. 40 years in the trade taught me to read systems by touch. That bottle was wrong the second my fingers wrapped around it. Weight, sound, temperature, everything screamed tampering. The bottle was lighter, not by much, but enough. I shook it. The rattle was different. Pills moving inside, but the sound was off. Wrong density, wrong material. I carried the bottle to my workshop, set it under the magnifying lamp on my desk. The same lamp I'd used for 40 years to inspect pipe fittings and valve seals. I opened the bottle. The crisp white round tablets were gone. In their place sat smaller pills, yellowish, different shape, different coating. I counted them. 30 pills. Same number as the prescription called for, but these weren't amlodipine. I picked one up with tweezers, examined it under the lamp, turned it over, checked for markings. Over-the-counter sleep aid, high-strength sedative, the kind sold at every pharmacy in Austin, the kind that in concentrated doses induced severe drowsiness, chronic confusion, vertigo, disorientation, the perfect chemical cocktail to fabricate a dementia episode in front of a paid medical evaluator. I set the pill down, stared at it for a long moment. There it is, I thought, the leak I'd been waiting for. I put the pills back in the bottle, screwed the cap on tight, walked back to the bathroom and returned it to the exact same spot on the shelf, positioned it at the exact same angle. Then I went to the kitchen, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, sat at the table, stared at nothing, processed what had just happened. Simone had walked into my bathroom, opened my medicine cabinet, removed my blood pressure medication, replaced it with sedatives designed to make me look senile. She was planning to drug me, make me confused, make me disoriented, then bring in some corrupt doctor to sign off on a cognitive decline assessment. Use that to petition for guardianship, invalidate the trust, seize control of everything, and she'd done it all on camera. I picked up my phone, dialed Floyd. He answered on the second ring. "Vernon, the second phase just started," I said. 6 words, that's all it took. Silence on the other end. Then Floyd's voice, quiet and steady. "I'll make the calls." He understood immediately. The financial fraud was one thing. That was civil, fixable, recoverable. Credit card theft, estate manipulation, even the guardianship scheme, those were legal battles. But this, tampering with an elderly person's medication, that was criminal. That was Texas Penal Code Section 22.04, injury to an elderly individual. First-degree felony, 5 to 99 years in state prison. And the cameras had captured everything. The performance had to be perfect, subtle enough to seem real, obvious enough for Simone to notice, and controlled enough that I never lost the thread. Floyd had pulled the camera footage the morning after I found the sedatives. Time-stamped, crystal clear. Simone entering the master bathroom at 2:15 in the afternoon, opening the medicine cabinet, removing my prescription bottle, standing there for 43 seconds with her back to the camera, her hands moving in ways the angle couldn't capture, returning the bottle to the shelf, walking out. We had her, but Floyd wanted more. If she's planning to bring in a fake doctor, he'd said over the phone, we need to let her think it's working. Let her think the drugs are doing what she wants them to do. So I started the performance. Early November, 2 weeks of calculated confusion. I stood in my workshop one afternoon when Simone was upstairs, reached for a wrench, hesitated, let my hand hover over the toolbox for just a beat too long, Grabbed a socket wrench instead of the pipe wrench I actually needed. Used it anyway, fumbling slightly. I hesitated just long enough when I reached for the wrench. Not enough to seem theatrical, just enough to make her write it down. From the top of the stairs, I could feel her watching. Another day, I stood in the center of the kitchen for 30 seconds. Just stood there, staring at nothing, like I'd forgotten what I came in for. Simone walked past. I saw her pull out her phone, type something. Her fingers moved fast. Notes app, probably, logging everything. I misplaced my truck keys once, left them on the kitchen counter in plain sight. Spent 5 minutes looking for them. Asked Russell if he'd seen them. He pointed to the counter. I acted surprised. Acting confused is like soldering copper. You need just enough heat to make the joint believable, but not so much that it burns and everyone sees the scorch marks. Bryn saw through it on the third day. I was in the kitchen that evening. Simone had just gone upstairs. I'd been pretending to forget where the coffee mugs were kept, opening the wrong cabinet, looking puzzled. The moment Simone's footsteps faded, I reached directly into the correct cabinet and pulled out Margaret's favorite mug without hesitation. Bryn was standing in the doorway, 14 years old, creekwater gray eyes that missed nothing. She watched me pour the coffee, watched me sit down at the table, didn't say a word. Later that night, she came downstairs, quiet, careful, knocked softly on my office door. I let her in. She stood there for a moment, then asked point blank, "Grandpa, are you acting—" I looked at her. This child who'd brought me 2 audio recordings of criminal conspiracy. This child who'd seen her own mother plot to destroy her grandfather. I smiled, gentle, honest. "Don't tell anyone," I said quietly. "Can you do that for me?" She nodded. Her eyes sparked with something I recognized. Intelligence. Shared conspiracy. Alignment. "What's going to happen?" she asked. "Justice," I said. "But it has to happen on their timeline, not mine. They need to think they're winning." She nodded again. Understood. From that moment on, my granddaughter and I were officially aligned against the common threat. November 18th, Tuesday night, 10 o'clock. I sat in my back office. Small room lined with bookshelves full of plumbing trade manuals I'd collected over 40 years. A single warm desk lamp cast yellow light across the desk. Margaret's picture rested in a hand-crafted wooden frame I'd built the year after she died. I picked up the landline, dialed Conrad Thornton's direct number. He answered on the first ring. "Vernon." "Final check," I said. "Walk me through it one more time." I heard papers shuffling on his end, the click of a keyboard. "Irrevocable living trust," Conrad said. "Fully executed, ironclad, filed with the county. No one can touch it. The Charitable Remainder Trust for the Margaret Ann Bennett Foundation is active endowment set aside for retired tradespeople, exactly as you specified. Your cognitive baseline exam 29 out of 30 on the MOCA is notarized, dated, and filed deep in the county court records, where no corrupt doctor can reach it." He paused. I heard him take a breath. "Vernon," he said, his voice dropping lower, "if they come to that house with a fake doctor and a fraudulent power of attorney document, we're ready. The moment they walk through that door, every charge we've prepared becomes active. Elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, medical malpractice if the doctor's involved. We have the video. We have the medication evidence. We have everything." Tuesday, November the 25th. I said, "I think that's when they'll move." Silence on the other end. Then Conrad asked, "How do you know—" "Because that's the day before Thanksgiving," I said. "They know I won't want a scene during the holiday. They think sentiment is my weakness. It was. It isn't anymore." Conrad was quiet for a long moment. 7 days, he finally said. 7 days, I repeated. "Call me the second it happens," Conrad said. "I'll have Floyd on standby. The DA's office is already briefed. We're ready." I hung up the phone, looked at the calendar on the wall. 7 days. I went to bed early that night, the sleep of a man who has done everything he could do, and is now simply waiting for the water to find the crack he left open. November 25th was circled in my mind. Not on paper. Didn't need to be. I could feel it coming the way a plumber feels pressure building in a sealed system. I'd laid every pipe perfectly, installed every valve, set every trap, documented every crime. Now all I had to do was wait for them to walk into the room and prove me right. The sleep of a man waiting for the pressure test. And the pressure was about to hit maximum. The house felt like low pressure before a Texas supercell, heavy suffocating, waiting to explode. Third week of November. days ticking down to Thanksgiving. The calendar said Tuesday the 25th was coming. I knew what it really meant. Simone stopped pretending to be civil. She moved my favorite porch chair, the one I'd sat in every evening for 20 years, off the deck and into the muddy side yard where the sprinkler runoff pooled. Left it there overnight. I found it the next morning, legs sunk 2 inches into mud. I cleaned it, dried it, put it back. She stacked trash bins directly in front of the kitchen window, blocked my view of the oak tree Margaret and I had planted in 1989. I moved them back to the side of the house where they belonged. Amazon boxes, heavy ones, left in the hallway where I walked every morning. 3 days in a row, I stepped around them, moved them to the side, never said a word. The atmosphere in that house was like a gas leak, invisible, toxic, and one spark away from an explosion. Russell stopped looking at me entirely. He'd leave before dawn, come home after dark, park in the driveway, walk straight upstairs without stopping in the kitchen. I'd hear his footsteps overhead, hear the bedroom door close. The hallmark of a coward, a man who knows he's participating in something evil but lacks the spine to stop it. One afternoon I was in the yard watering the garden. November in Texas, dry brown, everything dormant but not dead, just waiting. Russell pulled into the driveway, got out of his car, stood there for a moment, then walked over. I didn't stop watering, didn't turn around. "Dad," he said. His voice was quiet, tired. I adjusted the hose, moved to the next section of flower bed. "She's just stressed," Russell said. "This doesn't have to go this far." I stood there, held the hose, watched the water soak into the dry soil. "Son," I said, still not turning around. "It already went this far the night you sat there and said nothing." Silence behind me. I heard him shift his weight, heard him trying to find words, failing. Then his footsteps, walking away, back to the house, the door closing. That night I heard them arguing upstairs, her voice sharp, insistent, cutting through the walls. His voice just tired, very, very tired. The cracks were starting to show in their own foundation. I hadn't even touched it. Sunday evening, November the 23rd, exactly 48 hours before Tuesday the 25th. I knocked softly on Bryn's bedroom door. She called for me to come in. She was sitting at her desk, homework spread out in front of her, but I could tell she hadn't been working, just staring at the wall. I sat on the edge of her bed. "Tuesday," I said quietly. "Something is going to happen in this house. It might be scary, but I need you to know I'm going to be fine, and you're going to be fine." She turned to look at me, 14 years old, creekwater gray eyes that had seen too much for a child. "What's going to happen?" she asked. "Justice," I said, "but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She nodded. Then she reached into her desk drawer, pulled out a piece of notebook paper folded into precise quarters, the kind of fold a careful child makes when something matters. She handed it to me. "I wrote this a few days ago," she said, "but I didn't know how to give it to you." I unfolded it slowly. Her handwriting, careful, honest, raw. "Grandpa, I know you built this house with your hands. I know Mom and Dad have been wrong. I don't want to live with them anymore. I want to stay here with you, if that's okay." I read it twice. Let the words sink in. Then I folded the paper precisely, exactly the way she'd folded it, placed it directly inside my flannel chest pocket, over my heart. "More than okay, sweetheart," I said. She wiped her eyes, nodded. I stood, walked to the door, turned back. "You did the right thing," I said, "telling me, recording what you recorded, all of it. You're braver than you know." She smiled, small, tired, but real. I kept that letter in my shirt pocket for the next 4 days. Through everything that was about to happen, I could feel it there against my chest, the only thing that mattered when all the paperwork was done. That night lying in bed, I heard them again. Simone's voice, sharp. "Tuesday, 10 o'clock. I already confirmed with him. He'll be here. You just need to stay out of the way and let me handle it." Russell's voice, barely audible. "What if he won't—" Simone cut him off. "He's confused. You've seen it. The medication is working. He doesn't even remember where he puts his keys half the time. This will be over in an hour. Power of attorney signed. Trust invalidated. Done." Silence. Then Russell so quiet I almost missed it. "I don't feel good about this." "You don't have to feel good about it," Simone said. "You just have to not screw it up." I lay there in the dark, listened to the silence that followed. 48 hours. Everything was ready. The cameras, the evidence, the cognitive baseline, the attorney on standby, Floyd and his contacts ready to move. All I had to do was wait. Let them walk through the door. Let them think they'd won. and then shut the valve. I touched the pocket over my heart. Felt the folded paper there. Bryn's words. Her choice. That's what this was really about. Not the money. Not the house. Not even justice in the abstract. It was about making sure my granddaughter had a place to grow up where honesty mattered more than greed. 48 hours until the valve shut completely. The night before, Floyd and I sat in my kitchen drinking chicory coffee like we'd done 1,000 times before, except this time we both knew it was the last calm night. Monday, November the 24th, 9 o'clock at night. Floyd had parked down the street. Come in through the back door. Force of habit from 40 years in law enforcement. Never announce yourself when you're setting a trap. He poured himself a cup from the pot I'd made. No cream, no sugar. Just black chicory the way we'd both been drinking it since 1985. We sat at the kitchen table, went through the checklist. 2 deputies, Floyd said. Active duty, Travis County Sheriff's Department. There'll be an unmarked units down Cypress Creek Road starting at 9 a.m. sharp. Plain clothes. They'll stay out of sight until I call them in. I nodded. Conrad arrives at 8:30. He continued. Full legal portfolio. Trust documents. The cognitive baseline. Everything notarized and certified. He'll be standing in your kitchen when they walk through that door. Good. Floyd pulled out his phone, opened the camera app, showed me the live feed from the smoke detector in the living room. Crystal clear. Timestamp in the corner. Encrypted backup streaming to a secure server. Tested 3 times, he said. Everything works. If anyone in that room so much as breathes wrong, we have it on video. He set the phone down, took a long sip of coffee. Bryn's audio recording, I said. Triple backed up. 2 physical flash drives and a secure cloud server, Floyd confirmed. Even if they somehow got their hands on 1 copy, we have 2 more they'll never find. We sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from 40 years of friendship. Then Floyd spoke quietly. You know, Vernon, 40 years ago I arrested a man for running the exact same scam fake doctor. Fake POA against his own mother. He got 12 years. I set my cup down. I know. I read about it. Floyd looked at me, surprised. You researched this? I research every job before I start, I said. He smiled. Grim, understanding. I sat alone at that table for another hour after Floyd left, looking at Margaret's picture, promising her this was the last job, the last pipe I'd ever have to fix. Last job, Margaret, I said to the empty kitchen. I promise. After this, I'm just going to tend the garden. I went to bed at midnight, slept better than I had in months. Before I tell you what happened when that door opened, are you still with me? Comment A or B, and tell me why in 5 to 10 words A equals Vernon should have confronted them sooner, or B equals Vernon's. Timing was perfect. Please note, the next part includes fictionalized details for impact, but the lesson is real. Tuesday morning, November 25th, 7 o'clock. I brewed coffee in the kitchen, dressed in my faded flannel shirt, the exact same one I'd worn to the Driscoll grill 2 months ago when Russell told me I smelled like motor oil. I wanted them to see it, wanted them to remember. Crisp morning, freezing, Central Texas autumn coming in hard. 8:30. Conrad Thornton arrived, parked in the driveway like he belonged there, walked in carrying a black leather briefcase. He set it on the kitchen counter, opened it. Inside the certified trust portfolio, the notarized cognitive baseline evaluation from October 14th. 29 out of 30 on the MOCA exam, dated and sealed by Dr. Sinclair. Everything's here, Conrad said. The moment they produce a fraudulent document, we have the legal proof to invalidate it. 9 o'clock. 2 men stepped quietly into the adjacent den. Deputy Marcus Hoffman and Deputy Brian Kelsey, Travis County Sheriff's Department. Plain clothes. They pulled the door nearly closed, leaving just a sliver of space. Invisible from the entry, visible from the kitchen. Floyd Garrison sat at the kitchen table like he'd done 1,000 times before. Casual, comfortable, just an old friend having morning coffee. I sat dead center at the table, cup of hot tea in front of me. Bryn's letter folded in my chest pocket right over my heart. Waiting. 9:47. The crunch of gravel outside. Floyd murmured quietly, They're here. I know, I said. Then I heard it. The sound that changed everything. 4 car doors closing. Not 2. 4. I stood, walked to the kitchen window, looked out. Russell. Simone. A man in a white medical coat carrying a leather bag, and 2 workers in scrubs pushing a mobile gurney up the driveway. 4 doors. They'd brought a transport team. This wasn't just fraud anymore. They were planning to physically remove me from my own house. They brought backup, I said quietly. Floyd stood beside me, looked out the window, his jaw tightened. Mobile gurney, he said. Medical transport. They were planning to take you out of here on a stretcher. I watched them approach the door. Simone in front, confident, cold. The man in the white coat beside her adjusting his stethoscope. Russell trailing behind, shoulders hunched. The transport workers positioned the gurney at the base of the porch steps. I almost smiled. They'd gone all in. Good. Because so had I. The knock came at 9:47 a.m., hesitant, almost apologetic, like Russell still didn't understand what he was walking into. I shuffled to the door, let my shoulders slump, let my hand tremble slightly on the knob, turned it slowly like the simple mechanism confused me, opened it. Russell stood on the porch. Behind him, Simone, a man in a white medical coat, and two workers in scrubs with a mobile gurney. Simone pushed past me instantly, confident, in control, a legal clipboard tucked under her arm. Dad, she said, her voice dripping with rehearsed clinical concern, we're here to help you. We're worried. You've been forgetting things. The doctor is here to do a quick evaluation just to make sure you're okay. The man in the white coat stepped inside. Dr. Cyrus Whitaker, 55 years old. Pflugerville Clinic. I knew everything about him. $3,000 cash. Prefabricated cognitive incompetence form already signed and dated, just waiting for a name. He unzipped his medical bag. His voice oozed practiced empathy. Mr. Caldwell, he said, I just need a few minutes. He froze mid-sentence, because I wasn't slumped anymore. I stood perfectly straight, 72 years old, spine rigid as steel. My calloused hands rested flat and steady on the kitchen table. No tremor, no confusion. My eyes locked on his, sharp, clear, lethal. Good morning, I said, my voice calm and strong. I've been expecting you. You want to know what power looks like. It's not yelling. It's not rage. It's standing up straight when they thought you couldn't. Simone's face went white. The den door swung open. Conrad Thornton stepped out, black leather briefcase open, legal notices in hand. Floyd Garrison rose slowly from the kitchen chair where he'd been sitting, casual as could be, drinking his coffee. Then the hallway shadows moved. Deputy Marcus Hoffman and Deputy Brian Kelsey stepped into the room. Full uniform, badges visible, blocking the exit with absolute authority. The two transport workers froze by the door, suddenly realizing they'd been hired for a felony. Conrad walked forward, dropped a document directly in front of Dr. Whitaker. Dr. Whitaker, Conrad said, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years of courtroom experience. This is a notarized cognitive assessment performed by Mr. Caldwell's physician of 20 years. Scored 29 out of 30. Legally, he has full cognitive capacity. Any document you sign today certifying otherwise constitutes medical fraud under Texas Health Code. Whitaker stared at the paper. His hands started shaking. Deputy Hoffman opened a laptop on the kitchen table, turned it so everyone could see the screen. High-definition video, crystal clear timestamp. November 19th, 2025, 6:43 a.m. Simone Caldwell entering the master bathroom, opening the medicine cabinet, unscrewing the prescription bottle, dumping yellowish pills inside, closing it, walking out. Every frame perfect, legally admissible. Simone's face went from white to crimson. That's, she started. Evidence, Deputy Hoffman said flatly. Tampering with medication. Texas Penal Code Section 22.04. Injury to an elderly individual. First-degree felony. Then Deputy Kelsey pressed play on a portable speaker. Bryn's audio recording filled the room. Simone's own voice, ice-cold, clear as glass. He doesn't have to be confused. He just has to look confused on paper. Silence, then the click of handcuffs. Deputy Kelsey stepped behind Simone. Her wrists went behind her back. The metal snapped shut with finality. Simone Lee Caldwell, Kelsey said, you're under arrest for injury to an elderly individual, tampering with a consumer product, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Simone's mouth opened. No sound came out. Deputy Hoffman moved to Dr. Whitaker. Cyrus Whitaker, you're under arrest for attempted medical fraud and conspiracy. More handcuffs. Click, click. Whitaker didn't resist, just stood there, staring at his own hands like he couldn't believe what they'd almost signed. Floyd looked at Russell. Mr. Caldwell, Floyd said quietly, you're not under arrest, but you need to sit down. We have questions. Russell dropped into a chair like a puppet with cut strings. His face was a ghost, pale, hollow, staring at nothing. That sound Russell made, I'll hear it for the rest of my life. Not with satisfaction, with something closer to grief. The deputies read Simone her rights, led her toward the door. She twisted back, tried to look at me. "You set this up," she hissed. "You set all of this up." "Yes," I said. "I did." She was still screaming when they put her in the patrol car. Dr. Whitaker went quietly. Didn't say a word. Just walked out with his head down, handcuffs glinting in the November sun. The 2 transport workers were questioned, released. They hadn't known. Just hired labor. Wrong place, wrong time. The house went silent. Conrad packed his briefcase. Floyd made phone calls. The deputies filed initial reports. Russell sat at the kitchen table. Hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, just stared at his hands. Then he made a sound I hadn't heard since he was a little boy. Something between a sob and a question. Not words, just the sound of understanding breaking through 42 years of willful blindness. The sound of a child who has just learned for the first time that actions have consequences, that choices matter, that you can't take back what you've done. It was the saddest sound I'd ever heard, and it was 42 years too late, but the hardest conversation was still ahead. After they took Simone and the doctor away, Russell sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at his hands like he'd never seen them before. Floyd and Conrad stepped outside onto the porch, gave us privacy, the kind you need for conversations that can't have witnesses. Russell sat there, silent, his fingers interlaced, knuckles white. I poured myself a cup of coffee, didn't offer him one, waited. Finally his voice cracked. "How long have you known Dad?" I took a sip, set the cup down carefully. "Long enough," I said. He looked up, eyes red, face hollow. "The medicine," he stammered, "the cameras, the lawyer. You set all of this up before the dinner. The dinner was just the last confirmation I needed." He buried his face in his hands. "Did you ever think about just talking to me?" I let the silence fill the room, let it stretch, let it press down on both of us until it hurt. "I did, son," I said finally. "For 3 years. Every time I opened my mouth, you looked away. Some pipes, when they're corroded, that deep talking doesn't fix them. You have to replace them." Russell didn't reply. Tears fell, silent, onto the old wood table Margaret and I had bought at an estate sale in 1991. I watched my son cry. Not with victory, with something closer to grief. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now, Ian," I said, "you figure out who you want to be, without her telling you." He nodded, slowly, like a man learning to move again after a long paralysis. Russell left at 2 in the afternoon. I watched his car disappear down Cypress Creek Road. For a long time I stood at the window. I thought I'd feel something clean, relief, or victory. Instead, I felt what I always feel after a big repair job, tired and strangely hopeful. Thanksgiving came 48 hours later. For the first time in nearly a decade, I cooked a holiday meal for a small, true family. The kitchen smelled like it used to when Margaret was alive. Roasted turkey, wild sage, stuffing with celery and onions the way she'd taught me. The scent filled the log, home warm and fragrant the way holidays are supposed to feel. It wasn't an ostentatious spread, just a small bird, mashed potatoes, fresh rolls, and Luther Ashford's homemade pumpkin pie that he'd slid onto my counter that morning with a knowing smile and a nod. Bryn and I sat opposite each other at the kitchen table. 14 years old, her mother in county detention, her father alone in a motel off Ife 35, trying to figure out how to rebuild a life from scratch. But she was here, safe, with me. We ate in comfortable peace. She looked up mid-meal, direct, honest, the way kids are when they trust you. "Grandpa, is Dad going to be okay?" I set my fork down, thought about it, gave her the respect of an honest answer instead of empty reassurance. I think he might be," I said. "For the first time in a long time, he doesn't have anyone telling him what to think. That's the beginning." She nodded, seemed to accept that. We finished the meal in silence, the good kind. Luther stopped by mid-afternoon, knocked softly. I let him in. He took in the scene, the clean kitchen, the warm smell, Bryn reading a book on the couch, the restored safety of a home that had been infected for 3 years. "Looking good, Vernon," he said quietly. "Smells like a real home again." "It is I said." He stayed for coffee, left at 5. "You want to know what peace sounds like? It sounds like a 14-year-old girl asking if her father will be okay, and being able to give her an honest answer instead of a lie." That evening at 8 o'clock, Floyd called. I answered on the second ring. "Vernon?" "Floyd." He didn't waste time. Never did. Got the official word from the DA's office, he said. Simone's been formally charged. Injury to elderly individual, first-degree felony. Tampering with consumer product. Elder financial abuse. They're also looking at the financial records. The unreported income from the salons. IRS is interested. I sat down at the kitchen table. Same chair I'd been sitting in when this all started. Sentencing bracket, I asked. 5 to 99 years, Floyd said. His voice was grim, satisfied. First-degree felony in Texas. She's looking at serious time, Vernon, and that's before the federal boys get involved with the tax stuff. I let that sink in. Dr. Whitaker, I asked. Medical fraud, conspiracy, looking at 5 to 10. He's already trying to cut a deal, wants to testify against her. And Russell, not charged, Floyd said. Day doesn't think he knew about the medication tampering. He was just complicit in the guardianship scheme. Stupid, not criminal. I nodded to myself. It's going to be a long road, Vernon, Floyd said quietly. I know, I said. But you did the right thing. I know that too. We hung up. I sat at the table for a while, looking at Margaret's picture, thinking about everything that had happened since September. The birthday dinner, the eviction notice, the cameras, the performance, the trap. The look on Simone's face when the handcuffs clicked shut. The sound Russell made when he finally understood. I wrapped the Thanksgiving leftovers slowly. No rush. Put them in the refrigerator. Washed the dishes. Dried them. Put them away. Bryn was already asleep in the guest room, her breathing steady. Safe. I went to bed at 9 o'clock. Slept better than I had in 3 years. But the hardest miles were behind me. Conrad Thornton's paralegal handed me a manila folder 2 inches thick, and I understood why he'd scheduled 90 minutes instead of his usual 30. First week of December, downtown Austin. 7th floor law office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Congress Avenue. The afternoon sun was already sinking, throwing long shadows across the polished conference table. I sat across from Conrad. The folder sat between us like evidence at a trial. This is everything, Conrad said. The formal indictments, the charges, the cooperation agreements, the IRS investigation, all of it. He opened the folder, started pulling out documents. The weight of them, the thickness. Page after page of legal language typed in that sterile font attorneys use when they want to make sure there's no misunderstanding later. Simone Lee Caldwell. Conrad read aloud, his voice methodical and clear. 4 counts. Count 1 injury to elderly individual under Texas Penal Code. Section 22.04. First-degree felony. Sentencing range 5 to 99 years or life. I sat very still. Count 2 tampering with consumer product. Second-degree felony. 2 to 20 years. Count 3 elder financial abuse. State jail felony. 180 days to 2 years. Count 4 criminal conspiracy. Third-degree felony. 2 to 10 years. He set the indictment down, slid it across the table. I picked it up. Read it myself. Saw my daughter-in-law's name in black ink. Saw the words that would follow her for the rest of her life. Dr. Cyrus Whitaker, Conrad continued. 1 count medical fraud in connection with falsified medical documentation and attempted guardianship fraud. Third-degree felony. 2 to 10 years. He's already trying to cooperate. Wants to testify against Simone. Will they let him? I asked. Probably, Conrad said. The DA has him on tape accepting $3,000 cash to sign a fraudulent incompetence form. He's got nothing to bargain with except his testimony. I nodded. Conrad pulled out another document, this one thinner, crisper. Iris Criminal Investigation Division, he said. I looked up. I didn't know they were involved, I said. They are now, Conrad said. Cash-based business. Nail salons. Simone's been running unreported income through those salons for years. IRS estimates $127,000 in unreported income between 2021 and 2024. That's conservative. They think it's higher. He slid the document across. I read it. Tax fraud, federal charges, separate from the state case. The salons are still operating, Conrad said, under temporary management while Simone's in detention, but every transaction is being audited now. Every cash payment, every tip jar. The IRS moves slow, but they don't miss anything. The contrast hit me then. The weight of all this legal language, felony classifications, sentencing, ranges, penal code sections, and the simple human truth underneath it all. My daughter-in-law tried to kill me for money. All these documents, All these charges, all this bureaucratic precision. It was just the system's way of saying what I already knew. She poisoned my medication, planned to have me declared incompetent, tried to seize my estate. And when that failed, she was going to have me physically removed from my own house on a gurney. The legal language felt both validating and surreal. "What about Russell?" I asked quietly. Conrad's expression shifted, something like sympathy. "He's been offered a cooperation deal," he said. "Substantial assistance agreement. Full immunity in exchange for testimony against Simone. The DA doesn't think he knew about the medication tampering, just the guardianship scheme. They want him to testify about the planning, the conversations, the intent." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Will he take it?" "I think so," Conrad said. "His attorney's pushing him to. It's the difference between walking free and facing conspiracy charges himself. My son, testifying against his wife. The family fracture running deeper than I'd ever imagined. Trial date, I asked. Conrad flipped through the documents. Tentatively set for April 2026. That's 4 months. Could get pushed back depending on discovery and motions. But the prosecution is confident. They have overwhelming evidence. He ticked off on his fingers. Text messages between Simone and Russell, planning the guardianship petition. Financial records showing the unreported income. Medical examiner testimony about the sedatives found in your medication. Your hospital records from the initial collapse. Bryn's audio recordings. The video surveillance of Simone tampering with your prescription bottle. He looked at me directly. Even if she's only convicted on the lesser charges, Vernon, she's looking at a minimum of 2 years. But with the first-degree felony, 5 to 99, the DA's office is pushing for 20. I sat back, let it all wash over me. Justice, slow, precise, impersonal. The machinery of the state grinding forward exactly as it was designed to. I thought about Simone at 8 years old, sitting at this same kitchen table where I'd eaten Thanksgiving dinner with Bryn, teaching her to read blueprints for a plumbing job I was bidding on. She'd been so precise, so careful, following every measurement exactly, asking questions about load-bearing walls and pressure calculations, the same precision she'd brought to calculating dosages and timing her attack. The memories stung differently now. I left Conrad's office at 5:30, drove home through December darkness, past 2 of Simone's nail salons on the way, South Lamar, North Loop, lights still on. Open signs glowing, customers visible through the windows, manicurists filing nails chatting, laughing, oblivious. Their boss was in county detention facing decades in prison, and they were painting someone's nails candy cane red for Christmas. The businesses kept running, the money kept flowing, and somewhere in a federal building, IRS agents were building a case that would outlast the criminal trial. I pulled into my driveway at 6:15, saw the notice immediately. Certified letter card, tucked in my doorframe. ERS Criminal Investigation Division. Not addressed to me. Addressed to occupants of property owned by Simone Lee Caldwell. They were coming for the house. Russell's voice on the phone was flat drained of the careful diplomacy he'd held for weeks. "Dad, she had an exit plan, and it didn't include me." I was still standing in my driveway, the IRS notice in my hand when my phone rang. "Russell," I almost didn't answer. "What are you talking about?" I said. "The DA showed me the discovery files today," Russell said. His voice sounded hollow, empty. "Bank account statements, Cayman Islands, opened 2 months before your collapse. $47,000 I didn't know existed." I walked inside, set the IRS notice on the kitchen counter, sat down. "An exit fund," I said quietly. "Yeah," Russell said. "If the poisoning plot worked, she'd have your estate. If it failed, if we got caught, she had enough to disappear. Leave me holding all the debt. All the legal exposure, everything. Silence on the line. I went to see her," Russell continued. "County detention through the security glass. I asked her if it was true." "What did she say?" Russell's voice cracked. "She looked at me and said, 'You were always the backup plan.'" I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry, son," I said. Russell let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "I signed the cooperation agreement an hour ago. Full immunity. They want me to testify about everything, the planning, the guardianship scheme, all of it. And the divorce papers go in today." "You're doing the right thing," I said. "Am I?" Russell asked. "Testifying against my own sister. She was willing to let you take the fall," I said. "That's not a sister. That's a co-conspirator who ran out of use for you." Russell was quiet for a long time. "I'll call you later," he said finally. He hung up. I sat at the kitchen table, thought about Russell. In 1 week, he'd lost a sister, a co-conspirator, and a wife. Grief has no clean categories when family is the weapon. 3 days later, Conrad called. IRS moved faster than I expected, he said. They seized both locations this morning. Simultaneous execution. I was in my truck, pulled over. Both salons, South Lamar and North Loop. Conrad confirmed. Federal padlocks, seizure notices. The flagship location is completely shut down. North Loop is under receivership. They'll liquidate the assets to cover unpaid taxes. What about the employees? Out of work as of this morning, Conrad said. The manager at South Lamar, Lisa Brennan, she's been calling everyone trying to figure out if they'll get final paychecks. I told her to contact the receivership office. I hung up, sat there for a moment. Then I drove to South Lamar. 5 o'clock in the evening, December. The sun already down streetlights glowing orange against the cold. I pulled into the parking lot. The neon open sign was dark, for the first time in 8 years. Federal seizure notice taped to the glass door, yellow and black. Official. Final. Through the windows I could see the empty chairs, the silent nail drills, the bottles of polish lined up on shelves like soldiers with nowhere to march. My phone rang. Mr. Caldwell. A woman's voice, shaking. This is Lisa Brennan. I manage the South Lamar location. Conrad Thornton gave me your number. I know who you are, I said. I've been here 6 years, she said. Her voice broke. I don't know what to tell my girls. Half of them are single moms. They're asking me if they're getting their last paychecks, and I don't have an answer. I looked at the dark windows, the federal padlock on the door. Call the receivership office, I said quietly. The number should be on the seizure notice. They'll tell you how to file wage claims. Will they get paid? Eventually, I said. But it'll take time. She thanked me, hung up. I sat in my truck, stared at the building. 20 years ago, I'd helped Simone negotiate the lease on this space. Walked through it with her when it was just bare walls and concrete floors. Watched her paint the reception area herself. Sage green, her favorite color. She'd been so proud, so determined, building something with her own hands. And now federal agents had shut it down in one morning. The dark salon windows reflected my truck as I sat there. Empty chairs, silent drills. The machinery of vanity shut down by the machinery of law. Simone's entire commercial empire, the thing that gave her status in Austin, the thing that funded her designer clothes and her schemes, gone, padlocked, seized, liquidated, faster than the criminal trial itself. I pulled over across from the flagship location, got out, walked up to the glass door. The federal seizure notice was taped at eye level. Property of the United States government, IRS Criminal Investigation Division, unauthorized entry prohibited under 26 U.S.C. Section 7212. I stood there, read it twice. Thought about the day Simone opened this place, how she'd invited me to the ribbon cutting, how she'd hugged me and thanked me for believing in her. That woman was gone. Maybe she'd never really existed. The only thing worth shame I realized wasn't that she'd built an empire. It was how she'd tried to keep it. With poison, with fraud, with a backup plan that involved abandoning her own husband to federal charges. I got back in my truck, drove home. Christmas was a week away. Floyd had already called to warn me trial prep would dominate the new year. Depositions starting in January. Trial in April. A long road ahead. Russell called Christmas night from a motel off I-35, and his first words weren't apology or small talk. Dad, did you know your house is worth over $1 million? I sat at my kitchen table with a plate of cold ham and Brin's leftover potato salad. The TV played one of those black and white Christmas movies where everyone had perfect lives and problems solved themselves in 90 minutes. What are you talking about? Your property, Russell said. His voice had that hollow quality of someone calling from a bathroom or a cheap motel room with cinder block walls. I ran the comps tonight, couldn't sleep, so I pulled up the tax records and market data. Dad, you're sitting on $782,000 in house value. The land alone is worth $380,000 because of the East Austin zoning changes. That's $1.2 million. I looked around my kitchen, the warped linoleum I'd been meaning to replace for 15 years, the cabinet doors that didn't quite close, right the refrigerator that hummed too loud. This place? I'm a real estate broker, Russell said, and something in his voice cracked. I sell $1 million properties every month. I've never even looked at your tax assessment. My own father's house and I never bothered to check what it was worth. You know why I didn't answer. Because I thought I knew, he continued. One look at your driveway and your truck and your kitchen, and I decided it wasn't worth my time. That's what Simone saw in me dad. That's what she used. How many times had I failed to see what was right in front of me, too busy judging the surface to look deeper? Outside my window, someone had strung Christmas lights on the house across the street. They blinked red and green, cycling through the same pattern every 30 seconds. I'd watched them for an hour before Russell called. The preliminary hearing is Friday, Russell said. December 27th, 10 a.m. at the Travis County Courthouse. Holloway says I don't have to be there since I'm cooperating, but I want to go. I need to see her face when they read those Nevada priors. What Nevada priors? The DA unsealed them yesterday. 2 fraud convictions. Las Vegas, 2003. She ran a wedding planning scam, took deposits, and disappeared. Reno, 2007. Same thing, different business. Different name both times. Simone wasn't even her real name when I met her. It was Simone by the time we married, but she was born something else entirely. The potato salad smelled like vinegar and dill. Bryn had made it from her mother's recipe, the one she only used for holidays. I pushed the plate away. I'll be there, I said. Friday morning came cold and gray, the kind of Austin winter where the dampness cuts through your jacket. The Travis County Courthouse sat downtown, all limestone and Texas flags with metal detectors, and security guards who looked at everyone like potential problems. Bryn drove because my hands were shaking too much to trust myself on I-35. Russell met us outside, wearing a suit that looked slept in and carrying a briefcase he kept switching from hand to hand. You don't have to go in, he said. Holloway says it's just procedural. The judge sets the trial date rules on motions, that kind of thing. I came this far, I said. But when we got to the courtroom door, District Court, 3-Judge Patricia Donnelly presiding, I couldn't make myself walk through. The bailiff was calling cases, his voice echoing off marble floors. Lawyers in expensive suits crowded the benches. Everything smelled like floor polish and old wood, and the particular anxiety of people waiting for justice. I sat on the hallway bench instead. Bryn sat beside me, her hand in mine. Through the courtroom doors, I heard fragments. Judge Donnelly had a crisp voice, all business. The state of Texas versus Simone Caldwell, cause number F202-53847. Michael Holloway, Simone's defense attorney, tried to argue for reduced bail. Something about community ties and voluntary surrender. The assistant DA shut that down fast. When she started reading the Nevada convictions into the record, Bryn's hand tightened on mine. Las Vegas, Nevada, 2003. Fraud and theft by deception. Defendant operated under the name Simone Dubois. Reno, Nevada, 2007. Fraud and identity deception. Defendant operated under the name Simone Durant. Patterns don't lie. People do, but patterns tell the truth. Russell came out 20 minutes later. His face had that gray quality of someone who just watched their entire life story get rewritten as a cautionary tale. Trial date is March 24th, he said. Judge denied bail reduction. Holloway made some speech about rehabilitation and second chances, but Donnelly wasn't buying it. She said the Nevada priors demonstrated a pattern of deceptive behavior and flight risk. We walked out through security, past the metal detectors and the guards and the lawyers, making deals in the hallway. Outside downtown, Austin moved through its Friday morning rhythm. Food trucks, setting up office workers, grabbing coffee tourists, taking pictures of the Capitol building 3 blocks away. Russell stopped on the courthouse steps. The morning sun had finally broken through the clouds, warming the limestone. You asked me once what I saw in her, he said. You remember that right after we got engaged, you asked what made me so sure? I remember. I told you she made me feel like I'd finally made it, like I'd arrived at the life I was supposed to have. He laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. She didn't make me feel that way, Dad. I already felt that way, and she saw it. That's the difference. She didn't create the weakness, she just found it and used it. Bryn hugged him then right there on the courthouse steps, with lawyers and defendants, and families flowing around us like water around stones. The hard part is done, Russell said into her shoulder. The rest is just paperwork and waiting for March. I rolled primer on the garage apartment walls, 3 days after the hearing breath, fogging in the unheated space, and wondered what kind of person would want to live above a widower's detached garage in December. The ad ran for a week, 5 interviews scheduled. The first 4 were forgettable college students wanting cheap rent, a divorced office worker who smelled like cigarettes, a couple asking about partial payments. Thane Bentley showed up last Thursday afternoon when winter sun slanted through the garage windows. 28 years old, lean build from carrying pipe and crawling through attics. His hands caught my attention, knuckles stained dark with pipe dope, the kind that doesn't wash off. I knew those hands. I'd had those hands for 40 years. He looked around the apartment. Fresh primer new laminate flooring, kitchenette with 2-burner stove. The bathroom needed work, but it was clean. I'm 3 months from my journeyman exam, Thane said, looking at his knuckles. Your ad said $750, which is honestly more than I should spend, but the location's perfect for the shop I work at. Muller area, 10-minute drive. You like the work? I asked. I love it, he said, and something in the way he said it reminded me of myself at 28 when plumbing was still just about solving puzzles with water and gravity. My boss is good. Lets me take my time, learn it right. Says I've got the touch for it. I watched him run his hand along the bathroom door frame, checking the seal without thinking about it. This wasn't someone looking for cheap rent. This was someone looking for a place that made sense. $650 if you help me repipe that bathroom, I said. First month free if you let me teach you how to do compression fittings the right way, not the fast way. Thane looked at me like I'd spoken a language he didn't expect. Why would you do that? Because 28-year-old plumbers with pipe dope under their nails don't grow on trees. He moved in the day after Christmas. I showed him the breaker box, how the heater worked, where the water shut-off valve sat. He thanked me 3 times before carrying his first box upstairs. 2 days later, I found him in the bathroom with a tape measure and notepad marking measurements in pencil. He measured the doorframe twice, checking his own numbers, doing the math again. The same careful double check I'd taught apprentices 40 years ago, before houses became commodities and shortcuts became standard. Before my son decided plumbing wasn't prestigious enough and chased something shinier that turned out to be painted tin. New Year's Eve came quiet. Bryn made black-eyed peas and cornbread, Margaret's tradition for luck. We ate at 6, watched early celebrations on TV. She went to bed around 10, giving me space. Daughters know when their fathers need to be alone. I checked the mail around 11. A plain white envelope in the mailbox, no stamp, no postmark, hand-delivered. Inside was yellow legal pad paper folded twice, Russell's jagged handwriting. The letter started without greeting. I'm painting houses in Pflugerville. 6 days a week, 7 to 5, $40 an hour under the table. My hands hurt after every shift. Knuckles split in the cold. I finally understand why you were proud of yours. Bryn told me about the apartment, about Thane. She said you're teaching him the way you used to teach me before I decided I was too good for it. I wasn't too good, Dad. I was too scared. Scared I'd end up exactly like you, good at the work but never rich from it. Simone saw that fear and fed it until it ate everything else. I'm not asking for anything. Just needed you to know I get it now. The work matters because you did it right. I spent 15 years selling houses I didn't build to people who didn't need them, and I convinced myself that made me better than the men who actually knew how to fix a pipe when it burst. Trial's in March. Conrad says my testimony will take 2 days. I'll tell them everything, the offshore accounts, the cash deposits, the whole structure. Not because I'm noble. Because it's the only way out that doesn't make me more of a liar than I already am. I hope you and Bryn have a good new year. I hope Thane learns what I didn't. I love you. Daniel. Not Russell. Daniel. His middle name, the one Margaret chose, the one on his birth certificate before ambition, and Simone and real estate commissions, turned him into someone else. I read it 3 times. Then I set it on the kitchen counter beside Margaret's picture. 2 things I couldn't fix, only honor, by moving forward. Outside fireworks popped over East Austin, bottle rockets and firecrackers echoing off houses, gunpowder smell drifting through the screens. I checked on Bryn in the guest room. She slept breathing steady and deep, one arm tucked under the pillow, the way she'd slept since she was 5. Safe. Through the window I could see the garage apartment light. Thane was still up, probably studying for his journeyman exam, learning the codes that separated good plumbers from great ones. Midnight arrived with more fireworks. The neighborhood celebrating like the calendar changing meant something would be different. Maybe it would. Maybe it wouldn't. Trial was 10 weeks away. Russell Daniel was somewhere in Pflugerville with split knuckles and a paint crew. Simone sat in county detention waiting for March 24th. But tonight the only thing that mattered was that everyone under my roof had chosen to be here. The house was warm, the mortgage was paid, and 2026 started the way it was supposed to. Quiet, honest, and mine. The text arrived at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. Can we meet for coffee East 6th, that place with the truckers? I'm paying. And I stared at Russell's name on my phone for 3 minutes before typing Thursday 9 a.m. 2 days later, I walked into the diner on East 6th, the one wedged between an auto body shop and a tire store where construction workers and delivery drivers ate breakfast before dawn. The smell hit me. First bacon grease and burnt coffee and years of cigarette smoke baked into the vinyl booths, even though smoking had been banned indoors for a decade. Russell sat in the back corner booth, and I almost didn't recognize him. The real estate broker who'd worn tailored suits and Italian loafers was gone. In his place sat a man in a flannel work shirt with paint spatters on the sleeves, jeans worn pale at the knees, work boots with dried mud on the soles. His hair needed cutting. His face looked carved thinner, harder exhaustion etched around his eyes and mouth. But it was his hands that stopped me. Paint stains under the fingernails, calluses forming on his palms. The same transformation my hands had gone through 40 years ago, when soft became hard and clean, became permanently marked. He stood when he saw me. Didn't try to hug, didn't reach out, just stood there like he was waiting for permission to breathe. Thanks for coming, he said. I slid into the booth across from him. A server appeared. Dolores, her name tag said a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair, pulled back tight, and the efficient movements of someone who'd worked this floor for 20 years. She refilled Russell's coffee without asking and poured mine without waiting for an order. Ready to order, or you need a minute? She asked. 2 minutes, Russell said. She nodded and disappeared toward the kitchen. Russell wrapped his hands around his coffee mug. The paint stains were green and white primer, and trim work probably. His knuckles looked raw. I'm on a crew in Pflugerville, he said. 6 days a week, 40 an hour under the table. Boss doesn't ask questions. I paint, trim, cut, and corners, do the detail work. It's honest. Good, I said. I'm paying off the credit cards 200 at a time. It'll take 3 years, but I'm paying them. He looked down at his coffee. Conrad says my testimony will be 2 days, maybe 3. They want me to walk the jury through every offshore transfer, every false appraisal, every conversation where Simone and I discuss the structure. Can you do that? I have to. He finally looked up at me. I don't expect forgiveness, Dad. I just want to be someone you don't have to be afraid of anymore. I watched Russell's paint-stained hands wrap tighter around the coffee mug, the same hands that had signed fraudulent real estate contracts, now carried the honest dirt of labor, and the transformation felt both impossible and inevitable. That's a good place to start, I said, and extended my hand across the table. He stared at it for a second like he couldn't quite believe it was real. Then he shook it. His grip was stronger than I remembered, firmer. Working hands. We ordered breakfast. Ate mostly in silence. He paid the check with cash, left Dolores a $10 tip on a $20 bill. Outside in the parking lot, he stopped beside a 10-year-old Honda Civic with primer spots on the fender. That's mine now, he said. Bought it cash for $2,000. Simone's Mercedes got seized with everything else. It'll get you where you need to go, I said. Yeah. He opened the door, then turned back. How's Bryn? Healing. He nodded like he'd expected that answer and nothing more. Got in his car and drove off toward Pflugerville and another day of trim work. I met Conrad at his office 2 weeks later, mid-January, 8 weeks before trial. He had papers spread across his conference table, corporate charters, tax exemption, documents, foundation bylaws printed on heavy linen paper. The Margaret Ann Bennett Foundation for Retired Tradespeople of Central Texas. Conrad said, sliding the main charter toward me. Incorporated tax-exempt perpetual charter, approved by the IRS as a 501c3 charitable organization. I traced Margaret's name with my finger. The letters were formal script, embossed slightly into the paper. Margaret Ann Bennett. Her maiden name, the one she'd carried for 22 years before she married me and became Margaret Caldwell. She went by Maggie for 43 years, I said. But her legal name should be on this. It's permanent now, Conrad said. The foundation will finance affordable housing grants, medical assistance for uninsured elderly laborers, emergency financial aid for retired tradespeople across Central Texas. The endowment structure means it'll operate in perpetuity long after we're gone. 43 years of Margaret's quiet goodness compressed into 3 words on charter paper, a life of service finally made institutional and permanent. She would have approved, Conrad said quietly. I signed the incorporation papers. Conrad witnessed them. The foundation became real, not just an idea or a promise, but a legal entity that would carry Margaret's name forward into decades I'd never see. That evening I told Bryn about the coffee meeting while she cooked pasta in my kitchen. She'd been staying at the house 3 nights a week since New Year's, sleeping in the guest room, helping with groceries and bills, getting stronger. She was silent for 2 full minutes after I finished just stirring the pasta, watching the water boil. Steam rose between us. I'll see him, she finally said, but I decide when. You have to be there, and he comes here to Grandpa's house, not some neutral diner. Fair terms, I said. She nodded, still stirring. Trial's in 8 weeks. March 24th. Then he can come after that. After it's finished. After we know how it ends. She turned off the burner and drained the pasta. Through the kitchen window, I could see the garage apartment light on. Thane was home from work, probably studying for his exam. The foundation charter sat on the counter beside Margaret's picture. Russell was in Pflugerville with paint-stained hands. Simone was in county detention. And Bryn was setting boundaries that proved she'd survived. 8 weeks until March 24th. 8 weeks until the courtroom. Floyd Garrison grilled brisket on his back patio the last Saturday of January, and told me to bring an appetite, not a casserole. This one's on the county's dime, more or less. I showed up at 2 with a 6-pack of Shinerbach, and found Floyd's backyard full of people I half-recognized: deputies, a couple of prosecutors, some folks from the DA's office. The smell of mesquite smoke and searing meat hung thick in the cold air. Floyd worked the grill with the same methodical patience he brought to everything turning brisket, with tongs checking the temperature. Glad you made it, he said, handing me a beer. Want you to meet someone. He led me across the patio to where a man stood talking to one of the assistant DAs. Lean build, maybe 40, with the kind of observant stillness that came from years of watching people lie. Vernon Floyd set his hand on the man's shoulder. This is my son Pierce. Thought it was time you two met properly. I stared at Pierce Garrison, the private investigator who'd tracked Simone's offshore accounts, documented every fraudulent transfer, built the evidence that cracked the case wide open. Floyd's son. Pierce extended his hand, grinning. Christmas Eve, 98. You fixed our burst pipe at 11 p.m., wouldn't take a dime. My mom talked about it for years. The memory clicked into place, a frantic call from a woman on the east side. Water flooding her kitchen, her husband stuck on night shift at the sheriff's department. I'd gone over with my toolbox, fixed the split fitting, refused payment, because it was Christmas Eve and the job took 20 minutes. Your mother made me take home a plate of tamales, I said. She still makes them every Christmas, Pierce said. Still talks about the plumber who showed up in the middle of midnight mass. Floyd laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Kept it quiet so he could work your case clean. No appearance of favoritism, no conflict of interest. DA wanted everything airtight, but Hell Vernon now were even. I shook Pierce's hand again, harder this time. Thank you. Just doing the job right, he said, like you taught me. We ate brisket and potato salad while the January sun slanted low through the live oaks. The meat was perfect smoke ring, tender, seasoned with just salt and pepper, the way it should be. Floyd told stories about cases he'd worked. Pierce added details, and for 2 hours I sat among people who'd fought to get Margaret's stolen legacy back, without ever asking for recognition or gratitude. 3 weeks later, I sat in Travis County Family Court, while a judge named Alan Carmichael, 30 years on the bench, gray hair and reading glasses, the weathered look of someone who'd seen every variation of family dysfunction, reviewed the custody petition. Bryn sat beside me in a navy dress, her hands folded in her lap. 14 years old and completely steady. Russell sat across the aisle with his court-appointed attorney, wearing the same suit he'd worn to his wedding, now slightly too big on his frame. Judge Carmichael looked at Bryn over his glasses. Miss Caldwell, you understand what we're deciding today? Yes, sir, she said. And you've had time to think about where you want to live. I want to live with my grandfather, Bryn said, her voice unwavering. He's the one who's always been honest with me. The judge turned to Russell. Mr. Caldwell, do you contest this petition? No contest, Your Honor, Russell said. She should be with him. Judge Carmichael signed the custody decree with a ballpoint pen, 3 quick strokes of blue ink across official paper, and 14 months of chaos ended with bureaucratic efficiency. Sometimes justice was just paperwork witnessed and filed. Mr. Vernon Caldwell is hereby designated primary guardian with full legal custody, the judge said. Miss Caldwell will reside at the Cypress Creek Road address. Visitation scheduled to be determined by mutual agreement. Court adjourned. Outside on the courthouse steps, Bryn looked up at me with the first genuine smile I'd seen in months. Can we get tacos? I'm starving. We got tacos. Early March arrived with that particular Austin spring warmth, cold mornings bleeding into 70-degree afternoons. I spent a Saturday morning planting wild sunflowers in the front yard, the kind Margaret had loved, the ones that grew tall and ragged and came back every year without being asked. The dirt was still cool damp from overnight rain. I worked it with my hands, breaking up clumps, setting the seeds deep enough to take root. The wild sunflowers wouldn't bloom until May, but I planted them in March anyway, trusting the timeline. Some things grew slow, rooted deep, and returned every spring without needing permission. Above me, Thane hammered on the roof, replacing shingles. Blown loose in a February storm, he hummed off-key something country I didn't recognize. These shingles should last another 20 years, Vernon, he called down. You built this place to last. That was the idea, I said. On the front porch, Bryn sat on the swing with a paperback, rocking slowly, completely absorbed. The neighbor, Luther Ashford, retired postal worker who'd lived 3 houses down for 18 years, waved from the sidewalk during his afternoon walk. I waved back. Everything was where it belonged. The house was mine, the title clear. Bryn was safe and thriving. Thane paid rent on time and fixed things without being asked. The foundation carried Margaret's name forward. Russell was somewhere in the hill country, learning what honest work meant. Inside, I poured coffee and started dinner prep. Bryn had announced she was making lasagna her latest cooking project and needed the kitchen at 5. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like Texas, I found 2 pieces of paper, side by side. One was Bryn's report card 4 A's and a B+ in Algebra 2. The other was a postcard showing bluebonnets in the hill country, Russell's jagged handwriting on the back. Working steady, hands tougher now. Hope you and Bryn are good. Daniel, both of them figuring it out. Different paths. Same stubborn determination to do better than they had been. Better late than never. I left the postcard beside the report card and went back to the sunflowers. Trial started in 2 weeks. The final confrontation was coming. But today the dirt was warm, the house was full, and everyone under this roof had chosen to be here. I found the newspaper in a storage bin behind Margaret's Christmas decorations. Yellowed and brittle. Dated March 14th, 1987. The day I stopped the Hancock Street main from flooding 12 downtown businesses. 2 weeks had passed since trial. The garage needed organizing before summer heat made the work unbearable. I'd been putting off these bins for years, holiday decorations Margaret had wrapped in tissue paper, old tools I couldn't bring myself to throw away, boxes of receipts from jobs 3 decades gone. The newspaper was folded inside a plastic sleeve preserved deliberately. Margaret must have saved it. The headline ran across the top in bold print. Local plumber prevents flooding. Vernon Caldwell, 33. Works 18-hour shift to seal downtown main break. The photo took up half the page. There I was at 33, covered in mud from the waist down, kneeling beside the exposed main on Hancock Street. My hands gripped a pipe wrench the size of a baseball bat, and I was wearing that faded blue flannel shirt, the same style, maybe the exact same shirt, I'd worn to Russell's restaurant 6 years ago, when he'd looked at me like I'd tracked poverty across his marble floors. I stared at that photo for 5 minutes. Grandpa. Bryn stood in the garage doorway, backlit by the evening sun. She walked over, looked at the newspaper in my hands. What's that? I handed it to her. She read the headlines, studied the photo. That's you, she said. You're so young. 33. Younger than your father is now. She touched the photo carefully, like it might crumble. That's the same flannel Dad made fun of. The one he called white trash. She looked up at me. You were wearing it when you saved 12 businesses. It's a work shirt, I said. Does the job it's supposed to do? Same eyes, Grandpa, she said quietly. Same hands, just younger. She set the newspaper on my workbench, kissed my cheek, and went back inside. I left the paper there, visible a piece of evidence Margaret had preserved, because she knew even then that competence and dignity weren't determined by how clean your shirt stayed. The next afternoon I taught Thane torch soldering on the back porch workbench. The weather had turned warm, that perfect Austin spring temperature where you could work outside without sweating through your shirt. I'd set up 2 pieces of copper pipe flux solder and my old acetylene torch. Watch the metal color, I said, adjusting the flame. When it goes dull orange, that's when solder flows. Force it earlier and you get a cold joint that'll leak in 6 months. Thane's first attempt was too fast. The solder beaded on the surface instead of flowing into the joint. His second was too slow. The flux burned off and the metal oxidized. But on the third try, I watched him read the copper, wait for that dull orange glow, and touch the solder to the joint. It flowed like water into a crack, sealing perfectly. The copper drank the silver solder like thirsty ground after rain. I remembered teaching Russell the same technique 30 years ago, before ambition corroded the connection between what he wanted to be and what he was willing to become. I felt it, Thane said, staring at the joint, the moment it wanted to seal. That's the art, I said. Now you know. Bryn appeared in the kitchen window, watching through the glass. A minute later, she came out on the porch. Could I learn this? She asked. I looked at her, 14 years old, straight A student Margaret's granddaughter through and through. Margaret used to say the best plumbers understand water always finds a way, I said. You've got her patience. That's half the battle. She sat down beside Thane. I handed her a piece of copper pipe and started over from the beginning. Late that afternoon, after Thane went upstairs and Bryn started her homework, I sat in the cedar rocking chair I'd built for Margaret 40 years ago. Front porch, spring light slanting gold through the live oaks, blue bonnets framing the driveway in waves of blue and purple. Inside I could hear Bryn's music playing low, her voice humming along. The trial ended last week. 8 to 12 years eligible for parole in 6. I didn't go to sentencing already, said everything that mattered under oath. The jury took 4 hours to convict on all counts: fraud, theft, conspiracy, elder abuse. Simone sat stone-faced through the verdict, never looked at me once. Russell testified for 2 days, walked the jury through every offshore transfer, every false appraisal, every conversation where they discussed the structure. He cried on the stand when the prosecutor asked him about the medication, tampering the sedatives Simone had substituted for my blood pressure pills. Said he didn't know, would never have allowed it, would have stopped it if he'd known. I believe him on that one thing. The foundation disbursed its first grant in May, $15,000, to a 72-year-old retired electrician in Pflugerville who needed cataract surgery and couldn't afford it. Conrad called to tell me. Said Margaret would have approved of the choice. People ask if I regret it, cutting off my own daughter-in-law, testifying against her, sending her to prison. I'll tell you what I told Floyd. I regret it was necessary. I don't regret it worked. You might wonder if it was worth it, losing family, burning bridges, fighting through courts and depositions and trials. But poison doesn't negotiate, and family loyalty ends where attempted murder begins. Some relationships can't be saved because they were never built on truth to begin with. Russell's still in Pflugerville painting trim and learning what his hands can build when they're not grasping for shortcuts. We talk once a month. He hasn't asked to come back. He knows the terms Bryn decides when she's ready, and not a day before. Bryn's thriving, honor roll every semester, talking about engineering school, maybe architecture. She makes lasagna on Thursdays and studies at the kitchen table while I read the paper. She belongs here. Thane passed his journeyman exam last week. He's staying in the apartment talking about starting his own business in a few years. Good kid. Honest work. Inside, Bryn calls out, asking if Thane wants to stay for dinner. I hear him say yes through the open upstairs window. The house filling with chosen family, not inherited obligation. I rock slowly in Margaret's chair, watching the bluebonnets sway in the evening breeze. The system is clean. The pressure holds. The water flows the way it should. Some pipes need to be replaced to save the whole system. Family's the same way. And to you listening to my story, remember, this family loyalty matters, but it ends where betrayal begins. For too long I ignored the warning signs because I wanted to believe the best in people. I told myself Russell was just ambitious, that Simone's questions about my property were innocent curiosity. Don't make my mistake. When something feels wrong, when someone's attention to your assets outweighs their concern for your well-being, trust that instinct. I nearly paid for my trust with my life. This dad's revenge wasn't about anger or spite, it was about protecting what my family had built and ensuring my granddaughter had a safe future. Sometimes love means setting boundaries so firm they look like walls. I believe God put me through this trial to teach me that mercy without accountability isn't mercy at all, it's enabling. The revenge a dad takes when his family is threatened isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just refusing to be a victim, documenting everything and trusting the system to do its job. Justice delayed isn't justice denied, it's justice being thorough. What do you think about how I handled this? Would you have done anything differently? Leave me a comment below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories about standing up for what's right, subscribe to Dad's Sweet Revenge. You're part of this community now. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. As a final note, some details in this story have been adjusted for privacy and storytelling purposes, but the lessons, the heart of what matters, remain true.